Hello and welcome to Burn the Wagon series with me and the homie Thairie. Yeah, thank you for joining me again. And so hopefully we'll have a good conversation today about some topics regarding the residential schools, findings in Canada, Sha'carri Richardson, and her not being able to run in the Olympics, and the Olympics ban on marijuana and other substances that should not be banned. We'll be discussing the police budget and homelessness in Santa Cruz, California, which my homie Thairie is going to lead because he has all the facts on that and all the logistics. So let us get started on the residential schools. One little quote I wanted to read from Egerton Ryerson in 1847, a report from Indian Affairs. Their education must consist not merely training of the mind, but a weaning from the habits and feelings of their ancestors, and the acquirements of the language, art, and customs of civilized life. So this quote just goes to say they've been trying to assimilate us and wipe us out since the beginning. The first residential school was started in 1879, and the project was started by Richard and Henry Pratt, who got prisoners of war and brought them to a prison essentially and started assimilating them, and then took these results to the government, who capitalized on that idea by Mr. Henry Pratt. So I just wanted to see your thoughts on that and see if you had any input on those findings.
Yeah, man. First, I appreciate you providing that details and research for the listeners and viewers. Definitely important to really put into context with that. With that being said, it's definitely heartbreaking to have that one individual in history to give this idea to the government essentially to start this essentially a genocide.
Yeah, exactly.
Happened for centuries and for decades. And correct me if I'm wrong, the last residential school was closed in 1996, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and so from the 1800s till 1996, we had these residential schools, which was essentially, the slogan, which I've been hearing the slogan, the purpose of it was, kill the Indian within the child. And so, which completely Europeanize, youth and completely taking away their culture, their heritage, and who they are as a being, and completely, essentially in a Frankenstein sense, remold them in the sense of what's civilized and what's Europeanized, essentially during that time period. Even towards now, if we look at a lot of things, a lot of my friends who identify as brown and indigenous been speaking vocally for years about residential schools and stuff that's been going on. And so it's definitely alarming to see the numbers when it comes to now more research coming out, but I feel that it's great to have this conversation, via social media, because I always felt this conversation always been happening, but I felt with the power of social media in this day and age, because of the social and systemic awareness been created with so many different issues, related to, all of our, current societal issues, and when you tie it back to history, for example, residential schools, I think it's definitely important to really look back and critique it and see where we are as a society and see how we can, fix things.
Yeah.
I think at first, the first step is obviously, we always have this model of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. So speaking out about something as heartbreaking and heart-wrenching as residential schools, as painful and uncomfortable as that conversation is, I think it's important to really see how we need to progress moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, it's painful to educate people on this, but it needs to be said because these aren't ancestors. There's people that still survive these schools. There's people that still exist that went to these schools, and they live with that trauma. One woman talks about 3 examples of what it did, and it took away from the nurturing of the mother and the children, the father and the children. It took away from it. It added a lot of mental stress to them because they had never been in situations such as like a school or a city, or like they've never had to like dress up in like European, like you're saying, European attire. They never had to speak English. They never had to do these certain things that are required in European civilized societies. And that's the thing I was thinking about earlier, you know, like like Christian European societies have this like thought of like how people should live, if it's not that, you can't get into heaven, you can't get into whatever, you're not living a righteous life. And I think that was most likely hard for people to take, you know, because like Christianity nearly like wiped out this whole group of people, you know. So it's like, for me, it's hard to like speak on religion and stuff because my mom is heavily Christian, and like then I find out about these residential schools that ran these places for over so many years, you know, like you said, from
ran by, you know,
priests and Catholic, you know, and nuns and stuff like that. So I think the first one started the research started in 1879, and then the first school was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1881. So, and then like you said, the last one was shut down in 1993. So it's hard, like how do you take a race and then try to manipulate people to follow that race, but also you're killing them and saying like you should live in this holy way, but you kill a whole race of people essentially.
Before I go deep on you with this, I wanted to highlight a certain point, you know, tying back a little bit more to residential schools. Even when we look at locally in California, like shout out to the homie that I was on the phone with a little bit before I came over here. I was talking to her, and we're talking about her as well as my other friend who's indigenous as well. We talked about, you know, the missions, you know, California missions in California, how they contributed a lot to genocide and a lot of, you know, unfortunate, you know, tragedies when it comes to the indigenous community and reshaping, you know, unfortunately reshaping, you know, to society, which California is today, unfortunately, and, you know, obviously a lot of reservations, you know, here in California locally, and so seeing the result of residential schools on top of, you know, religion with the missions and, you know, churches kind of contributing to a lot of this genocide as well. I think it's also, a deeper discussion when we talk about religion, because for me, you know, as a black male, you know, historically when you look at, you know, even for, you know, black folks, when it comes to Christianity, the first thing we looked at is Baptist, you know, religion, and seeing how also a lot of, you know, white folks, you know, that was upholding white supremacy and even slavery for black folks, you know, use religion as a, you know, systemic tool. You know, I think that's just, I think that was mostly a conscious effort on maybe, I think, controlling even the poor whites and kind of reestablishing to me that, you know, that upholding that white supremacy, you know, moniker and goal. And to me, I was talking about it the other day, it was like, it was basically, I forgot who made the quote, it was basically, when it comes to white supremacy, if you can convince the poorest white individual that they're more superior than the poorest person of color, then white supremacy is succeeding. Essentially. And
that's
so,
a good point.
And unfortunately, you know, when it comes to religion, it's a coping mechanism for a lot of folks from a spiritual level. From just, you know, even when people are facing, you know, poverty and dealing with stress and pain, you know, people turn to religion as that outlet. Even for, you know, people who are white, you know, turn to that as an outlet. And, you know, I can imagine during that time period, people, you know, in these positions of power, even in European and colonial, you know, time periods, used religion as a tool to convince, you know, the ones who aren't in control or more impoverished and going through poor even as equally as, you know, people of color or counterparts who are people of color, convincing them that you need to force them into this religion, force them into this, you know, your way of life, convincing them that your way of life and my way of life is more superior to a person of color's way of life. You know what I mean? And so I think even in that sense, which is also a deeper discussion about religion too, because I think people too, when it comes to, I think the three things people are scared to talk about is religion, politics, and I forgot the third thing, but it'll come back to me. But definitely, those are dicey situations.
Yeah.
And for me, when I talk about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, it's like these are conversations that we have to have moving forward, because a lot of people, you know, to me, idealize the perfect society moving forward. Even when people, I think I did a speech at the mall where I told people to close their eyes and imagine a community that you want to see moving forward that'll not only benefit you, but people around you in the community at large. And so, you know, ideally, you know, when we, you know, want to make the change, we have to address these uncomfortable things, even when it comes to religion. I think religion, unfortunately, has been, you know, a tool to really, you know, suppress and control a lot of folks. Even though religion does have its pros, but we can't ignore the cons.
Yeah, and not only it's not only in our country. You know, religion has caused wars in the entire world for thousands and thousands of years over like religion, a made up thing, you know.
Not to go too heavy when we look at, you know, Palestine, Israel, you know.
Exactly.
As dicey as that situation is, you know, it was a religious, you know, issue essentially.
I mean,
the ground roots of it.
Do you like? That's a good thing to talk about too, because that's another thing that's going on. Like, do you know like really what's going on there? Because I haven't educated myself fully on it.
I'm trying to, but it's really that's why I was saying it's really dicey to kind of go for one side or the other.
Yeah.
For me, I'm looking at it from more of the political aspect of. I see that the people, I have no, you know, qualm against either side when it comes to the people, because if they believe something, they believe something.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I feel a lot of the conflict is being kind of forced a lot by the governments on both sides of the situation, instead of realizing that, hey, we need to come together and make, you know, the world and society as we want a better place. It's more conflicted and manipulated more by the government aspect. And so unfortunately, again, you know, we you know, religion is unfortunately that tool to use that, you know, which is my opinion. I feel it's mostly a government thing when it comes to this conflict.
And I mean, I could be really wrong, and anybody can correct me. I think like, I mean, the Palestinians are like the natives there, essentially, and whoever else is fighting them is trying to come out and push them out, and has been pushing them out for thousands and thousands of years, essentially.
Yeah.
And they don't even have any land to essentially call their own. And I think in some places they're not even allowed to say I'm a Palestinian or like I'm from Palestine, because it's so heavily like just like a genocide, you know? It's another genocide essentially happening. And I could be wrong, and I do have to do more research on that. But that is a good topic to bring up, because that's another huge thing that's going on. It was like a whole week's worth of like people getting bombed and people dying, whole buildings being collapsed. So that is a good topic. And I mean, if anybody in here knows anything about any of this, you can definitely comment, and I'll try to read it and check it out. But yeah, I want to continue talking about a little bit about the residential schools. So, as we said, 1881 was the first residential school. By 1900, there was 20,000 students in residential schools in the United States. So 25 years later, there was 60,000. So only 25 years, and I'm 28. In my lifespan, there's that many, 40,000 kids being taken away from their parents and shipped to these residential schools, where in some of these residential schools you would have like a brother and sister in classrooms, and they would see each other, and they weren't allowed to speak to each other. They weren't allowed to even know they were in the same building together, because they didn't want to have them continue their language or continue their cultures or continue anything that they had to do with each other. So it's another just like horrifying thing like that they did to each other, just like mentally just fucking with them, just literally not allowing them to speak the only way they feel comfortable. So they're forcing them to be something they're not, you know.
Yeah, and it's more heart-wrenching, because kind of speaking about children that were involved in the situation. And for me as a black male, I kind of, you know, see this, you know, this tragedy happening that kind of tied to how black folks went through during slavery, essentially.
Yeah,
when it comes
absolutely.
To the realm of religion that we're talking about, you know, the fact that the residential schools were held under the church realm, the religious moniker, as priests and nuns were running the schools. And so with slavery, when I was bringing up the Baptist religion, a lot of that was kind of like the outlet when it came to slavery. A sense of hope, but also a sense of a lot of manipulation at times, is because even a lot of black ministers black folks in slavery who became ministers and preachers were preaching under the name of white God, white Jesus, quote unquote. And so, in a sense of obedience, in that sense of, if you be a good slave, you'd be rewarded by white God, white Jesus. You're seen as you'll be seen in a good light when you eventually die and go to heaven. But unfortunately right now they're going through a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, brutality, just terrible, heart-wrenching things going on during slavery, as well as residential schools when it came to sexual assault, come to hair being forcibly removed, attire being essentially changed. Even if you couldn't speak your own language, your own culture, you'll be severely punished or beaten, or even like families couldn't reach out and communicate or come get their child, at a sense of correct me if I'm wrong, they would be denied resources, denied funds and resources from the government or from the forces that were taking the children away, essentially. And so I have this kind of like more spiritual when I hear that, not to make light of it, but when it comes to what black folks are going through systemically, I can definitely feel that heart-wrenching.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question I was going to ask you about something, but I forgot. But yeah, absolutely, man. And now it's going to like eat at me. Is there anything else you had on this topic?
Yeah, I think right now when we focus on residential schools, it's like, I know the big deal was looking at Canada, and recently Canada Day just happened. A lot of people were saying we're orange in solidarity, like we're wearing a little bit of orange. I'm not the greatest person when it comes to orange.
I don't have orange either.
Yeah, but I wanted to rock a little bit of orange in support, and I did so also on the 4th of July. Because both days we're looking at the overall liberation of, of ideally the liberation and freedom of the country, Canada and the U.S., with the 4th of July, but look at a lot of genocide and a lot of, trauma and history when it comes to people of color, what we've been through to get our, version of freedom and liberation. Juneteenth just happened, last month, and for many black folks, that's, our Independence Day compared to the 4th. And so I think when we look at Canada, because I think just recently I saw Deb Haaland, who's spearheading the investigation for murdered missing Indigenous women, also is trying to do something similar to finding out more about residential schools in the United States. And so I think that's definitely really important to look at, not just the Canada aspect, but also the U.S. aspects. I think right now, throughout social media, a lot of people are calling out Canada for a lot of their tragedies and a lot of their trauma. And I think the Prime Minister, one of the Prime Ministers in Canada that's like kind of going into the investigation of the residential schools further, was speaking out about it. And I think it's important for the U.S. to really acknowledge it from a government level, like a Joe Biden or even, Kamala Harris, who are priding themselves on wanting to get to the root cause of systemic issues and change. And I think this is one of those first giant steps, and having someone in power like I think a Deb Haaland is very important to really highlight that, hey, residential schools, we need to figure this out and look at the history and talk about it and discuss it. And I think it's deep also to really, really spearhead this issue more when we look at the issue of critical race theory right now in schools. So it's like a lot of states are banning critical race theory, meaning that a lot of the systemic history, like a residential school, and the more deep systemic issues about how the timeline of events really affected people of color is being essentially banned in schools. And so I think it's really, up to the community to really continue this conversation, continue this back and forth dialogue and open conversation. And that's why I was kind of more so kind of afraid rephrasing getting comfortable to uncomfortable, because moving forward, there's a lot of issues as organizers and activists that we're trying to really spearhead and really tackle. And for the public to really rally and support, I really, always urge people, it's totally fine being comfortable to uncomfortable about these issues. Because even for me as an activist, hearing about residential schools and hearing about a lot of things across my time feed and across, just news outlets and stuff that I see and hear, it's traumatizing and, really dramatic, myself. But for us to grow and figure out better ideals of a better society moving forward, and better policies and legislation that benefits people of color moving forward, is really important to really talk about these systemic issues.
Absolutely.
Like residential schools.
Yeah. And what I was gonna ask you is, like, when slaves were brought over, like, do you know, like, if they, like, prohibited them from speaking their native language once they got here, or do you know?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Yeah, so that's all I was.
Yeah, I wondered that too, because they lost the whole culture, they lost the whole language, they lost everything.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. It's completely kind of just dehumanized.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Basically, when black folks were enslaved, it's completely a dehumanized thing. Just similar to, that's why I felt such a correlation with with a lot of things that indigenous people went through, as far as stripping our people of our language, our culture, our heritage, just our spirituality, our prideness about being black, to essentially forcibly convert us into this societal way of life,
assimilating you.
Yeah.
Well, they had no intentions to ever like let you be free people. So like.
Essentially. And so even I think I was having this conversation with my mom, and so a lot of Africans were speaking in code, in the sense of speaking in a language that I think, I feel bad. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anyone's watching this right now, I think Swahili.
Yeah, that's definitely one I've heard of.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of those languages that was more universal for all Africans that were being forcibly.
So everyone just can.
So it's that way of like, it was a way to continue the conversation, even though I felt over the generations the language got lost. Even for me, I can't speak African. Even though my mom, she's learning Igbo right now.
Okay.
So
where do you know where that?
Nigeria. So West Africa. So it's more so African roots getting back into.
Yeah.
So just stuff like that is very important. But as far as culture and language, I think it was just mostly speaking in code. So out of fear of what youth was going through residential schools, of retaliation and punishment and assault and stuff like that. So definitely a lot of speaking in code that I was aware of, during those times of slavery that I was researching and stuff.
Yeah, wow. And that's crazy, man. That would be a cool thing to like get back to, is some of that language, you know what I mean? And because you were a part of tribes too, like you weren't like none of that like European like city life stuff, I love that like tribal like community like shit, dude. I love that,
Right.
I love that type of living, because it was like, I don't know, just something about it just makes me just like happy, and just like makes me like, I don't know, just happy, Let's see if anybody has any questions. Important topics. Okay, no questions yet. Somebody just said, proud of you speaking on important topics. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for everybody that's joining us today. We're definitely excited to be here talking again. Again, this is the Burden Wagon series with Thairie. And we just got done talking about some residential schools, so I think it's a good time to move on to a little bit of this Sha'carri Richardson situation. For those of you who don't know, she was just qualified for the Olympics in the 100-meter dash, I believe, and afterwards she was having an interview with a reporter who had told her that her mother had passed away, and this interviewer was a random person, so that's a little bit weird to find out from a random person, So she was obviously fucking devastated. Smoked weed, which is legal in the state she was in, which is Oregon. But under the World Association for the Olympics, I can't remember the exact acronym or whatever, it's not allowed to smoke weed, which she got banned for only 1 month. And then she will have the possibility of returning to the Olympics, which is the next event or whatever is a month away, exactly how long her suspension is. So I just wanted to kind of see your thoughts on that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate to hear what happened to Sha'carri Richardson. I think it was a topic I want to really touch on today. I think it's very important to look at it from a systemic point of view But I think first of all, just look at the whole realm of how the situation came to happen. The fact that, you know, it was a random reporter during a casual interview after something, you know, celebratory as her being able to qualify and be able to compete in the Olympics, which is probably aspirations for a lot of athletes in that field. And so for a reporter to kind of just flat out tell you, hey, your mom passed away, how do you feel about that? You know, I can only imagine that's like a traumatic, traumatizing situation for her. And so for her to find, you know, unfortunately when it comes to dealing with pain and coping mechanism, you know, it was probably for her in that instance the only outlet she can really rely to. You know, I can imagine it's probably hard to really focus on competing at a high level like the Olympics and then go find someone to really talk to about this situation on a personal, deep level. And so for me, I think is really deep thing, really highlight that, you know, she did engage in recreational use of cannabis in the state of Oregon. But for me, I think, for the Olympic Committee to kind of look at the realm of how they categorized her being suspended of labeling cannabis as a performance enhancing substance is really questionable. I think that's what the backlash through social media came to be about when it comes to saying that, referring to an athlete who used cannabis and then competed at a high level like that as performance enhancing, you know, substance is really, you know, baffling. You know, just for me looking at a systemic standpoint of how cannabis has been used for so long, even when we look at the war on drugs and why policing is so problematic the way it is, it's all correlated to the war on drugs and how cannabis historically has been used to, you know, really demonize and really stigmatize and criminalize a lot of people of color. And so for me, you know, I think over the years seeing a lot more research come out about the benefits of cannabis on a medical standpoint when we look at, you know, versus, you know, someone using pharmaceuticals and using alcohol and using all these, you know, other, you know, more deadlier substances in my view, my personal view. And so for her to kind of essentially be banned, I mean, I do understand on one standpoint, you know, it is a rule essentially by the Olympics that you can't use substances as you're, you know, competing in the games. But I think in this instance, I think it's kind of also analyzing it from a committee standpoint. You know, the Olympics, as historical as it's been, always felt the Olympics has been, whether they liked it or didn't like it, always were at the forefront of a lot of social and systemic issues. One thing I can think of probably when I was going to school reading about Jesse Owens, you know, conveniently track and field. Yeah. And so even during that era, he was competing in the games when Nazi Germany kind of had the realm of control and were engaged actually in the Olympic Games.
Everyone knows the famous picture.
Yeah, even from that standpoint, the 1968 Games, you know, of San Jose State track and field. So
wasn't that him that did that with the Nazi Germany people?
No, that was 1968.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was John Carlos and Tommy Smith.
Okay,
that was in the photo. I know because I have that picture. I have it literally like above my room, above my bed. So it's like that's one of those my favorite pictures as well. But yeah, with Jesse Owens, I think it was around I forgot which. I know it was in 1932. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anyone is watching this, definitely feel free to correct me, knowledgeable wise. But I think it was basically during the Olympic Games, during the 1930s, where Nazi Germany kind of had control. Nazis had control of Germany and were occupying Germany at that point, and unfortunately were involved in the games. And so seeing, you know, Jesse Owens compete with a lot of, you know, pretty much essentially blonde, you know, white, blue-eyed Germans, and really, you know, not to be pun kicking their ass in track and field, it did something historically to where it went against that issue of white supremacy, even at a Nazi Germany standpoint, because seeing Hitler was sitting there and watching, you know, this black male dominate his chosen athletes to compete in this epic games. And so for him to just storm off in anger was really a powerful message for that. And then if you fast forward, which you're talking about with the famous fist with the 1968 Games, you know, that in itself was historical. Even though the backlash for those athletes, you know, was very significant. You know, their medals were taken away.
Really?
I believe.
Have they ever been given back, or?
I don't believe so.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I believe a lot of things for them is simply like finding employment or even getting credibility from the Olympic team was very altered after that initial statement. Even though we look at now timeline wise that that was a historic moment, a sense of pride and liberation for Black folks to dominate and compete at a high level and also raise that social systemic awareness at the time of 1968. That was as you're wearing the Black Panther shirt. That was the time. That was the significant time period of why they raised the fist to raise social systemic awareness. And I think for me, when I look at the Sha'carri Richardson situation, I feel it may be a timeline in time when we look at cannabis and realize should we continue to criminalize and stigmatize this when it comes to certain situations, or should we no longer ban it?
So the issue with it is same thing, like it's legal in Oregon, right? And then it's not legal in another state. So the issue with it is there's some places here in America, like in America, that it's legal, but like the world. So it has to do with the world. Everywhere in the world has to come to this agreement where they agree that weed is okay.
Right.
And medically, and I don't think the world is at that point. We're there in America for sure.
Right.
But I don't think everywhere. I mean, I could be completely wrong too.
Right. And that's a deep thing to really talk about. Also, I think when we talk about just countries that's willing to be the trailblazers, because essentially, when we look at the United States, as imperfect as we as discussing talking about it, in a lot of ways, the United States is the forefront of a lot of systemic, and social changes and awareness about things that happen globally. I think even when we look at the protests and marches that happened last year, Black Lives Matter, influenced a lot of countries. When we look at India, when they were protesting, the farmers, the farm workers, and if you look at Cuba right now, and look at all these other countries that's been marching and protesting as well, they were inspired a lot by Black Lives Matter, what was going on in the United States. And just my friend I met, organizer friend I met the other day, I was telling her about the mural that artist painted in Syria. So it's this rock in Syria, but it was basically a painting with George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And when they interviewed the painters in Syria, they were like, we saw the video, and a lot of the trauma that many Black folks were going through in the United States, we can relate to that, how we were getting treated here. And so really a lot of the inspiration of things that we're doing in the U.S. is essentially inspiring a lot of countries.
That's a good point.
And for me, when I look at cannabis, when we look at that, certain states are legalized versus other states. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a kind of moment in time when we look at the U.S. because even I think when they asked Joe Biden about the Sha'carri Richardson issue, it was kind of like he kind of went with the cliche, the rules or the rules, essentially. But I think when we look at cannabis, essentially the government now is essentially making profits off.
They are absolutely
off cannabis as long as they've been stigmatizing and criminalizing it. Creating the wealth of mass incarceration, which was profitable a lot for the entities who are enforcing this cannabis. And now that they're decriminalizing it, they're still making essentially still making money off of it with dispensaries and products and even flower itself, or even growing flower itself. I think it's very important moving forward to kind of look at it from a systemic government standpoint of realizing, should we continue to criminalize it? Should we continue to make profit off of it but at the same time criminalize it?
Yeah.
Or should we just flat out decriminalize it? And for me, my goal is to hopefully urge for it to be taken off as a Schedule I substance.
Yeah.
It's because the fact that cannabis is still, even though we're making, in the states like California that we're in right now, making billions of dollars right now from dispensaries and cannabis related items and products, I think it's very important to really remove it as a Schedule I substance, is because when you label it cannabis in the same realm as cocaine or heroin or any of these other bad substances, you put that cannabis in that same umbrella. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunately you still got a lot of folks who look at the rules itself and say, okay, it's still Schedule I, it's still a drug essentially. And I think the biggest goal moving forward for me as an organizer is really to urge it to be taken off as a Schedule I substance, just for the sheer fact of how cannabis has affected people of color in the criminalizing light, when we look at war on drugs and mass incarceration and over hyper policing, and also even during like the 80s and 90s, which the tough one, I think, forgot that Clinton Clinton bill, which created 3 strikes law. So the tough on crime bill. So it's like essentially that was spared off the war on drugs and criminalizing cannabis essentially. And even with that, that created even a whole round of stigmatization towards youth, people of color that were youth of color. When we used the term super predators, in that sense, they were referring to a lot of youth that were quote unquote selling drugs, but a lot of those youth were selling drugs because in communities they weren't making nearly enough money. Clearly didn't have enough resources, but they saw this, substance or even other substances to make, to essentially survive when it comes to poverty and really better and trying to improve their family's well-being. And so I think for me, moving forward, I think it's really deep to really have that deep discussion about how do we get to this point of really analyzing this one thing with Sha'carri Richardson, looking at from a deeper systemic standpoint with our government.
Yeah, so I think that, weed was technically first banned in, let me see, in 1989, in the Winter Olympics, and I could be wrong on that date, but in the Winter Olympics when a Canadian snowboarder was caught in Japan, but he wasn't banned or anything, he got his medals back. They did a whole investigation, they put him in jail for a couple nights and investigated, but he eventually got his medals back, and then after that they put it on the substance ban list.
It's irony too. You said Japan, and it's like the Sha'carri Richardson incident.
Yeah,
is in Tokyo. The whole Paralympic Games in Tokyo.
I didn't even think about that.
So it is a deep irony. Unfortunately, a deep irony, full circle.
Yeah, and they are allowed to smoke weed when they're not competing in the game. So it is a thing they are allowed to do recreationally if they are in a state where they could do that and it is legal. And another thing I want to touch on, a lot of people were kind of getting upset because she's a black woman being held her opportunity to go to the Olympics, but the 3 people behind her are all black women. Gabby Thomas is the fastest woman alive over 200 meters. Gabby Thomas is 4th. So 5th is English Gardner, 8th fastest time ever through 100 meters, also already has a gold medal. And then there's Aaliyah Hobbs. So and she's another, I think she was the 5th fastest woman alive or something like that.
Right.
And they're all going to compete in the Olympics. And Sha'carri is really young. She has 2024 isn't that long away. I think it was a big uproar also because such the tragedy that she just went through.
Right.
And also people are upset because they're holding her from not winning a gold medal.
Yeah. I think she wasn't. I think with that, even though her suspension is going to be lifted, I don't think she was selected to be part of the team moving forward with this current Olympic game. So I think which is also the growing frustration. Then on top of that, there's other things going on with the Olympics that's been rubbing a lot of people of color the wrong way. So we look at the fact that even when we brought Black Lives Matter, essentially that's banned right now from the Olympics.
Oh, really?
Being expressed.
I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Being expressed or even verbalized or even apparel is banned from being part of the games because their, ideal view was we don't want politics or political issues involved in the games, but it's we brought up the 1968, significance. We brought up the, Jesse Owens Olympic Games.
Which is because at this point weed is technically a political discussion now. So because it's gotten to the point where is it decriminalized or legal so
and on top of that, I think even with black female swimmers in the Olympics right now, they did something as petty as ban Afro hair caps.
Hair caps.
So but essentially Afro hair caps for more eccentric, bigger hairstyles. And so even their excuse was the elite athlete doesn't need that much size room for a cap. And so for me, I think this is the growing frustration. I think for people of color who aren't really fully involved in watching the games, when they hear these stuff of Sha'carri Richardson and the Afro Cap and
That's
Black Lives
point.
Matter itself being banned. I think that's what makes the growing frustration of people of color. Like, we shouldn't even be watching these games.
Okay.
It should be athletes not even competing in these games, because I think it's just looking at the discrimination and just the overall prejudice of the Olympic Committee in that sense.
And that goes back to like, are you saying they have to cut their hair? Like, why are you saying they should? You know what I mean? I'm just saying the Olympic. Like, why do they? What if it's like their culture to have long hair, and like well, what are you saying they can't do that because they're an Olympic athlete?
Exactly.
That doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's something that should be okay. I didn't know these things.
I think it's just looking at it from. I think that's what's also growing frustration when we look at black athletes in general. Is like, I think what they view most people of color view athletes vastly different. We pride in this day, even American society. We hold athletes on a high pedestal and a high appreciation, but most athletes are vastly different. We look at different sports, for example. We look at one of the names I'm thinking of right now out the blue is maybe Marshawn Lynch. He has vastly different personality as he is. He's farly different from a white counterpart athlete. And so looking at, a lot of entities like in the Olympic Games, or even like a lot of these entities that, are focused around the sports realm, their sense of what they view an athlete as more marketable and profitable versus another athlete. And so I think, it's unfortunate. I think the Olympics kind of took that approach. I think they were looking at from a more marketing and more profitable standpoint. And they kind of thought it was going to be negative for their bottom line to figure out one of their star athletes who's breaking records in their games.
Let's admit it, dude. Sha'carri, she looks dope. She looks dope with that dyed hair. She looks dope with those long hair, like nails, and her sleeves. And that's something that the Olympics, I feel like, doesn't want tied to their name.
Exactly.
That flair, that swag that she got.
Because I remember even when I was watching the 2008 Olympics, when I was still living in San Francisco at the time, when I first saw Usain Bolt. And at the end, at the end of his 100-meter dash, he was beating his chest. Pridefully as he was, running, past the finish line or making it towards the finish line, knowing that he was winning. A lot of, commentators were like, oh, that's selfish, or he shouldn't do that. That was ego of him. And it's like,
you're just pumped up, man. You're pumped up. You feel good about yourself. Dude.
Yeah.
You just accomplished something so amazing. Yeah. Like, you should be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
And you're on an Olympic stage.
And so for me, even that's a deeper discussion to have when we look at, the realm of athletics. It's like looking at these entities, these institutions that, focus around sports. Just looking at them, what do they view the athlete as, or what's their view of a model, athlete?
When we celebrate, it's arrogant or it's cocky, but when I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know. He should be able to celebrate any way he wants to fucking celebrate. Whether he's fucking white, black, blue, red, or,
Exactly.
And it shouldn't be, like, thought of as cockiness or arrogance, because he made it to that stage, Okay, so is there any other things that you had on that topic?
Yeah, I think,
Or is there any questions that anybody has, or anything, for us? Nope, not right now. Is there any questions on your?
Oh yeah, let me check mine. See if I said something. No, not so far right now. But yeah, I think right now, see if I I think hopefully, for me, when I was bringing up the Schedule 1 substance with cannabis in general, I think for me it's important because that's why I was bringing up trailblazing, the U.S. being trailblazers for a lot of change and a lot of awareness. I think for me, urging kind of the U.S. government, mostly Biden and others, to make an executive action to remove cannabis as a Schedule 1 substance, I think a lot of countries will notice that, in that sense of making it more global and known that cannabis is decriminalized in a country like the United States, who historically has benefited off criminalizing people who were associated with cannabis or used cannabis. I think other countries will inspire other countries to pause to think like, as powerful as the U.S. is, they just did something like
That's
this.
True.
You know, should we do the same? And I think when we look at Japan, they're pretty strict about certain things still. And so I think they can be even influenced by a United States or even other countries who have been so strict about cannabis as well. Will maybe look at the U.S. and be like, if you took it off as a Schedule 1 substance, you made it legal across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will make them develop similar policies and legislation moving forward. So
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really good valid point.
Yeah.
Like you said, being a trailer, that's super. I didn't think about that. That's really that's a really good point, to be honest. Yeah. And so another thing that people are talking about as well is we talked about earlier is Michael Phelps. So he was suspended for 3 months and then he lost all his endorsements afterwards. So and Sha'carri is able to keep them. So it's like it's hard to say. If it's like for me, I don't know, man.
And I think she was even recently a vape company, cannabis wax vape company reached out to Sha'carri that offer her $250K.
Really? Wow.
That'd be pretty much an endorser.
It's a huge loss that she's not able to compete in these Olympics, but like she's gonna gain those endorsements. She's gonna gain a lot of people that's gonna support her just from this situation because they feel for that.
Yeah, and I think when we look at even the beginning of why this issue came to be is mental health.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing to look at for people of color.
Yeah.
Just within the last year with the pandemic and everything going on, stress wise when it comes to income, I think even statistically now they say it's hard to even find affordable rent anywhere.
I don't know if this is here in California, but in New York, no one working a minimum wage job can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. In maybe in the United States, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just saw some research on my time feed across the United States. Just if you have a full time basically 2 jobs, it's definitely still hard to afford rent anywhere, or you're pretty much using most of your income to pay rent.
Yeah.
Essentially, and so even from that's a mental health stressor for a lot of folks. So,
and that's the second athlete that's come out recently talking about mental health.
Yeah.
With Naomi Osaka recently as well.
Yeah, and then even recently this morning I saw some with Richard Sherman. He had some things going on. I'm not gonna really touch on it too much, but even that round from this series of mental health issues. So I think even then when I was even bringing up athletes being pulled up on a high pedestal, I can't even imagine, being an athlete on that high level right now, with the parameters of being a model citizen, being a model athlete, being a model person, role model essentially for people looking up to you.
So many people look up to you.
Old, young, in the middle. So I think it's really, even cameras on you 24/7, whether you're competing or not competing. Even someone that's wanting to take a selfie with you or get an autograph from you. So I can imagine, the mental health toll. And then thinking deeper about the mental health toll for people of color in general.
Yeah.
Right now with the whole year, bringing up affordability, bringing up housing, just poverty, dealing with all these things is one big mental health thing. And so I think, looking at deeper in the U.S., how are we as even the U.S. or even society, how are we dealing with mental health?
And that's and I know for sure if a person like Richard Sherman or something like Marshawn Lynch was or someone I don't know, I'm just naming the last 2 people you mentioned, but was we need to talk about mental health, and I saw that on ESPN or I saw that on his Instagram or I saw that somewhere, I'd be like, damn, I don't know, because you look up to them.
Right.
They're like you said, we put them on, and if they're talking about it I know it's kind of following, but I don't know, man, because they're influential people, so you want to do what they're doing or talking about, you know what I mean?
Right.
And if they're talking about mental health, and that's a good thing to be following. It's not you're following the leader on some go do this stupid shit. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And I think even unfortunately now, when I brought up critical race theory, a lot of high government officials aren't talking about these things, and as activists and as an activist myself, I probably do the community itself to really just talk about it amongst each other, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, and even something like mental health is an uncomfortable, really situation to talk about, because a lot of people, can destigmatize as like, oh, even when we look at, even issues of like stuff that happened recently with mass shootings and stuff like that, the first thing that was tied into was mental health.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, because it's a double-sided issue of like looking at something that's tragic as like mass shootings and then tied to mental health. So it creates that frustration with a lot of folks, but also is a deep thing to really talk about when it comes to just talking about the realm of how things in society has affected people's psyche and affected people mentally.
And talking about mental health and talking about rent and stuff like that, let's move on to the subject that you wanted to bring up, and that's homelessness in Santa Cruz and the budget that the Santa Cruz County Police just got. So I'll just let you go ahead and take over on that.
Yeah, so the city of Santa Cruz, thanks to John Leonard, correct me if I'm wrong, I have it, in my stories I've been posting, I'll repost it later on my story. So essentially the city of Santa Cruz was rewarded $14.5 million. A little over, they're projected to receive more than $14.5 million for the homeless response, essentially. And so for me, it's a little like a head scratch, is because I'm like, a month ago the city just voted, a 5-2 vote, which was made it pass, which I think the CSSO ordinance, to pass the CSSO ordinance. So for those who don't know, the CSSO ordinance is essentially the camping services standard ordinance, which essentially is a homeless ban of banning individuals from sleeping openly, around city property. So amongst city property during, any aspect of the day. So take, for instance, if someone is sleeping in front of City Hall right now, Santa Cruz City Hall, for instance, someone's sleeping out, essentially, the police will kind of like come up and tell them essentially to move it along. If they refuse to move along, they would get cited, essentially. And depending on how many the number of citations, they will constantly keep reoccurring with that one individual, they would essentially be, put in jail, essentially. And so for me, it's very dicey when it comes to using police. Again, when we talk about, hyper policing, it's really alarming for me to use police as the solution for this homeless response. And so for me, that's very much of a terrible situation, is because for me, I dealt with homelessness personally in Santa Cruz, and for me, it's more of a personal thing. But I think more from a societal thing is really important, because most, homelessness, people put it in one big umbrella of all these issues. Of when I hear like negative rhetoric on homelessness is very alarming. So it's like, oh, druggies and this and that and the third.
I think that's the main people who put it into, is they got to that situation because they're a drug addict. Is the main thing people think about when they talk about homelessness.
Right. And right now, when we look at, even when I was bringing up housing equitability and looking at being able to afford rent, that's affecting everyone right now across the U.S. right now, at this point, across the board. Like even at this point, systemically, I don't think there is like a middle class. You can really say if there is a middle class anymore. You know what I mean? So essentially, everyone's working, somehow doing some type of side hustle. And so for me, even with homelessness, it can really be a benefit of many factors. When it comes to substance, even with substance, that's a very, when we brought up Sha'carri Richardson, that's a very, total thing. Is it mental health? Is it poverty? Is it stress? Is it coping with something? It's really a lot of elements to me when it comes to homelessness, not just from a mental health standpoint, because even when I lived in San Francisco, my mom, she essentially worked at a hospital that dealt with mental health. And when now that we have Governor Newsom, I remember him as Mayor Newsom in San Francisco. When he was the mayor, he essentially shut down a lot of hospitals, including a mental health facility that my mom was working at, citing that it was lack of budget. You know what I mean? So essentially, a lot of these, individuals who were getting proper mental health treatment were essentially just pushed out into the streets to fend for themselves, and a lot of them were having mental health episodes. And so a lot of people, from affluent, backgrounds, would get threatened or alarmed or sketched out, and immediately the first thing you do is call authorities about this individual having an episode or flipping out in the middle of the street. And so for me, it's a very dicey situation to bring police involved in that. And then also, even for the city to initially do that ban, and then like a month or two later be like, oh, we just got money for the homeless response. So it's like, well, you kicked the homeless essentially out of town. And so that's what I think for me is like really raising the awareness with the community is like hold the city accountable about when we get money for the community, and really upholding that the money that the city is receiving is to really benefit the community by building more, actual structures. Because it's really really picking with me. Really don't like the camps. I even don't like saying the term camping when it comes to homelessness, because it's not a camping experience. It's not. It's not a weekend in Big Sur or Tahoe. It's like
that's their home.
It's life. It's unfortunate the life situation that they're dealing with right now. It's like you can't find like a hotel or housing. So it's like you have to sleep out.
They didn't drive there for the weekend and say, "Oh, this is where we're putting up our tent."
Yeah, because even essentially, like I remember, like during the season when you was doing the which important food drives and clothing drives. I remember those days when it was like weird, windy, rainy weather, and I'm sitting in my home. I was just like, I can imagine what someone in a tent is going through right now.
That was my main thing in doing them, because I was riding my bike to work one day and I had 3 layers on, like 2 pairs, like a pair of sweats, a pair of jeans, a long sleeve shirt, a sweater, and then a huge jacket on. And I was like, yo, like there's people living outside during this, like, and I have the luxury of like being able to go to my house, like, and sit there, and like.
Even during the pandemic, when we analyzed the lockdown pandemic, even me as an essential worker dealing with a lot of customers who are like, I'm so glad I'm not stuck indoors anymore. It's like, well, you're blessed with that luxury.
Yeah, exactly.
As police is essentially doing this ordinance, which went into effect July 6th. You know what I mean? So essentially right now, and the fact that I just hear that all of a sudden the city's getting $14.5 million.
Yeah.
And on that same coin, they recently just sold property in downtown Santa Cruz. So on Front Street, where the Santa Cruz Community Credit Union is, on Front Street where Food Not Bombs normally operates, they essentially sold the property to a New York investor, a New York private developer from New York, and he's essentially trying to build a hotel within downtown Santa Cruz.
And we don't need more hotels.
Yeah, exactly. Like right now, if anybody that's watching this, if you go to the Santa Cruz Boardwalk right now, you see so many hotels that's being constructed, so many hotels that's being remodeled, reinnovated.
We don't need that shit.
Exactly. And even if you go on like Ocean Street in Santa Cruz, it's a line of hotels to choose from.
We need community centers, we need stuff for youth, we need stuff for people to do that actually live here.
Right.
Like we need to think about the people that live here, not just the tourists. Yeah, it is a huge tourist town, but there's people that actually live here as well.
Right. And even if you look at other cities like San Francisco and like bigger cities that's going through homelessness, like they're actually I'm not gonna maybe agree that they're maybe doing the full solutions, but I think they're doing a lot better approach to what Santa Cruz is doing, definitely when it comes to the homeless response over the years, because I've been here since 2008. That's how I started off homeless, and seeing it full circle now in 2021, it's not much has changed, unfortunately, with the homeless response. And so for me, I think it's definitely important for really the community to really hold our city leaders accountable when they get funding like this, because this is a very, serious deal. You get, some money, let alone $14.5 million, for to help essentially a crisis that's going on in the community. I think it's very important for us to really study and also really hold our city leaders accountable, and actually, like as you're reiterating, providing services, providing mutual aid, even for me, supporting programs that are already doing the grassroots. You know what I mean, such as yourself and other organizations that's been in the ground trenches helping out with the homeless response efforts. And so for me, I think it's very important, like you said, to really start building more facilities for the homeless, actual living facilities for the homeless. And I think even mutual aid services focusing on mental health and other, related services to really uplift them and get them out of those situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing you kind of said that like people are finally trying to say like they feel better that they're able to be out of the house. So think about your mental health when you're in this house or in your house locked down in the pandemic. Think about those people that are locked down for a measly crime like weed, which is legal in the majority of the states of United States, and they're locked away for 15, 20 plus years for marijuana. And you see companies making profits, like millions of dollars, for a drug that you sold maybe a gram of or whatever, an ounce of. So I think that's a big issue of, like you're talking, mental health needs to be talked about as well. And now that we're all getting out and the mask mandates lifted and stuff, remember your mental health, because you have been sitting in this house for the last year. Treat people that are essential workers with kindness, please, because we've been working this whole year over the pandemic, dealing with you people that don't want to come in with a mask. He's dealt with so many not maskless people at his farmer's market. So just have compassion for people when you're going back out into life. And did you have any other topics you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, and I think that's very important to really highlight that essential workers aspect. I think it's very important even moving forward to really also focus on the well-being of essential workers.
Yeah.
I think for a whole year, even now, I don't even know if that's even a term, saying essential workers. I think during the pandemic, it was a big deal saying the word essential, workers, and these were like in a year before, if they're, someone that's working at Burger King, they would be disregarded. It's like, you're making, anybody can.
You work at Burger King.
Anybody can, flip a burger and make some fries, but it's like during the pandemic when you needed food, when there's a food scarcity, it's like, oh, you're essential.
Yeah.
Or even like, people that are working at Amazon right now, that are dealing with a lot of things, preventing like unions from being formed, and a lot of their things being, a lot of their things being violated with them as workers. People are just like, oh, you're getting paid to work in the factory and ship out boxes. But it's like during the pandemic, you're essential. You're needed. I need my items to be here.
Yeah.
I appreciate you for.
And I've heard horrible work conditions about Amazon too. So and we can just pop in and see if we have any questions. I don't think we do. I think that's all the questions we have. Anybody have any questions for us?
Yeah.
If not,
some comments real quick.
If anybody wants to tap in.
Shouts out to the homie Salute.
Yeah. So thank you for everybody that's joining us today and everybody that commented on the Burn the Wagon series. I'm going to be posting this on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. If anybody wants to tap in and join us for any of these conversations, definitely hit me up in my DMs. We'll make something happen. If you have any topics you want me to talk about or do any research on, if so, I think we're done for the day. Peace, love, and happiness. You guys have a good day.